They abandoned me at the age of 60, as if I were an old piece of furniture that was no longer useful. But when I won millions in the lottery, suddenly everyone remembered my name. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd share. And if you, for just a second, feel like this sounds familiar, all I ask is that you leave a like and subscribe. It's going to help me keep venting. My name is Carol Hope Morrison, and for 60 years, I believed that a mother's love was something unbreakable, something that grew stronger over time like fine wine or true friendships. How naive I was. Love, I discovered, can also become a bargaining chip, something negotiated when money is involved. It was a Tuesday afternoon in Brooklyn, New York, in the small apartment on Myrtle Avenue where I had lived since my husband passed away 15 years ago. The blinds were half closed, letting in those golden sunbeams that filtered between the century-old brownstones of the Bushwick neighborhood. The aroma of the latte I had just made blended with the smell of laundry detergent that was always in my house. Because cleaning was my way of keeping my hands busy when my mind insisted on recalling better times. I was wearing my navy blue housecoat, the one that had small embroidered flowers and already showed the wear of years of use. My felt slippers softly brushed the tiled floor as I headed toward the small balcony where I kept my pots of red geraniums. Those flowers were my only constant company, the only ones that didn't judge me for growing old, for having wrinkles around my eyes, or for my hands trembling slightly when I held the watering can. It was then that my cell phone rang, that device my children had given me last year, on the condition that I learned to use it so I wouldn't bother them so much. My oldest son's name, Matthew, appeared on the screen, and my heart raced, as it always did when one of them called me. It was so rare for them to do it without wanting something in return. "Mom," his voice said on the other end of the line, cold as the marble of the tombstones in the cemetery where his father rested. "We need to talk." I immediately dropped the watering can on the floor, my whole body on alert. When Matthew used that tone, something bad was coming. It had always been that way, even when he was little. He was a man of 42 years old who worked in the finance sector, who managed million-dollar investments for others, but who always seemed to count every dollar he spent on his own mother. "What's wrong, honey? Are the kids okay?" "The kids are perfectly fine. It's about you we need to talk." That "we" chilled my blood. It meant he had spoken with his sister Elaine, and when my two children agreed on something concerning me, it was never to give me good news. "Matthew, what happened?" There was a long pause, so long that for a moment I thought the call had been cut off. Then, like someone reading a press release, my son pronounced the words that would split my world in half. "Mom, Elaine and I have been talking. You're 60 now. You've lived your life. It's time for you to let us live ours." The words hit me like punches to the stomach. I sat down on the worn velvet couch where I had watched my children grow up, where I had sewn their school play costumes, where I had cried over their first heartbreaks and celebrated their academic achievements. "What do you mean by that, Matthew?" "I mean that you need to understand you are no longer the priority in our lives. We have our families, our jobs, our projects. We can't be worried about every little drama of yours." My voice came out as a broken whisper. "Drama? What drama? I never ask you for anything." "Exactly. Always whining for attention, for affection, wanting us to come visit, wanting us to bring the grandkids. You just don't understand that you're in the way, Mom. You're in the way." That word pierced my chest like a rusty dagger. I, who had given my best years raising them, who had worked as a seamstress late into the night to pay for their college tuition, who had skipped meals so they could have the best. I was in the way. "I just wanted to see the children once in a while, Matthew. I'm not asking you for money or to support me." "Precisely. It's the same subject all the time. The grandkids, the family, Sunday dinners. Mom, the world has changed. Grandmothers no longer dedicate themselves to waiting for visits all day." In the background, I could hear the voice of Elaine, my youngest daughter, that successful economist who lived in a luxury apartment on the Upper East Side, and who had inherited her late father's calculating coldness for numbers, but also for feelings. Or, "Matthew, tell her nobody has time for her dramas anymore. We're not in the 1990s. My son didn't even bother to move the phone away. He wanted me to hear every word of my own daughter's disdain. "Mom, did you hear Elaine? We're not in the 1990s anymore. Mothers nowadays know how to live alone. They have their own lives. Get a hobby, enroll in some course for senior citizens, but stop waiting for us. Tears began to roll down my wrinkled cheeks, but my voice remained firm. A hobby? For senior citizens? But you two are my life, Matthew. You're the only thing I have left after your father died. And that's the problem, Mom. Dad died 15 years ago. 15. Don't you think it's time for you to make your own life? Elaine and I can't carry your loneliness forever. Carry, as if I were a sack of potatoes, a dead weight, an uncomfortable obligation that had to be tolerated out of family commitment. Honey, I'm not asking you to carry anything. I just wanted to keep being your mother. And you are. But being a mother doesn't mean we have to live for you. Being a mother means knowing when to take a step back. A step back? Towards where? I wondered. Towards nothing. Towards oblivion. Towards that invisibility I had started to feel since I turned 60, when the world decided I no longer had anything valuable to offer. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, but my ears had stopped processing the words. I only heard the background noise of my own irrelevance, the dull sound of a life that had become unnecessary for the people I loved most in the world. When I hung up the phone, I stayed sitting on that sofa for hours, watching the sunset light slowly fade through the window. The geraniums on the balcony seemed to mock me with their vitality, with their ability to bloom, even when no one was taking special care of them. That night, for the first time in 60 years, Carol Hope Morrison wondered if she had really lived her whole life, or if she had simply existed for the convenience of others. I didn't know that in 3 days, a simple lottery ticket with the numbers 7, 14, 23, 31, 42, 49 would change not only my fortune, but the very definition of what it meant to be valued by those I thought loved me unconditionally. But that revelation was still to come. For now, I only had the silence of an apartment too small to contain so much abandonment, and the echo of my children's words resonating in every corner like an emotional death sentence. You're in the way, Mom. You're in the way. The days that followed that call dragged on like wounded snails. Brooklyn, New York continued its fast pace outside my window, but inside my small apartment, time seemed to have stopped in a dimension where only the echo of my children's words existed. I woke up every morning with the absurd hope that it had all been a nightmare, that Matthew would call to apologize, that Elaine would show up with her children like in the old days. But my phone remained as silent as a tomb. I started reviewing my photo albums, those worn leather folders where I had kept every important moment of our lives. There was Matthew at 5 years old, hugging me after his first school play at St. Patrick's School, his eyes shining with excitement as he told me, "Mom, did you see how I acted?" There was Elaine at 8, sitting on my lap while I taught her cross-stitch, her small, clumsy hands trying to follow my precise movements. At what point had I stopped being their refuge to become their burden? I remembered with painful clarity all the sacrifices I had made for them. When Matthew's father left during his adolescence, I worked double shifts at the textile factory in Paterson, New Jersey, to keep the house. My fingers had become slightly deformed from years of machine sewing, and my back creaked every morning as a protest against the nights I had spent hunched over endless fabrics. But I never complained. I never told them I was tired. I never made them feel like they were a burden. When Elaine wanted to study economics at New York University, I sold my mother's jewelry, those small gold pieces I had inherited and planned to leave as family heritage. "Education is the best inheritance I can give you," I had told her while counting the bills they had given me at the pawn shop. Elaine had cried that day, promising me that she would someday return everything with interest. Those interests never arrived, neither emotional nor economic. Matthew had needed a guarantor for his first apartment when he married Ruth. I put up my own house as collateral, risking the only asset I had. "It's only temporary, Mom," he had assured me. "In 2 years, we'll have enough capital so you can withdraw the guarantee." 5 years later, he had renewed his mortgage and extended the loan to buy a luxury car, but my house was still the collateral. When I asked him about it, he told me that things had changed in the financial market and that it was more convenient to maintain the current conditions. Convenient for him? Of course. During these days of silence, I began to make mental calculations. Over the years, I had spent my savings on expensive birthday gifts for my grandchildren, on family dinners where I paid the bill because I was the grandmother, on weekend trips to the Jersey Shore where I covered the lodging costs so the whole family could be together. How much money had I invested in buying moments of happiness that I now discovered were only commercial transactions disguised as love? On Wednesday afternoon, while organizing my papers at the small desk where I kept the household accounts, I found a notebook I had completely forgotten about. It was dark green, with the corners folded from use, and it contained all the amounts I had loaned my children over the years. My late husband, Anthony, had taught me to keep track of everything, even family loans. Money loaned within the family is easily forgotten, he would say, while meticulously noting every movement in our finances. But numbers don't lie, Carol. They never lie. I opened the notebook with trembling hands and began to read. March 2018, $3,000 to Matthew for Ruth's medical expenses, never repaid. July 2019, $5,000 to Elaine to invest in a high-yield fund, never repaid. December 2020, $2,500 to Matthew for exceptional holiday expenses, never repaid. April 2021, $4,000 to Elaine for a unique business opportunity, never repaid. September 2022, $1,800 to Matthew for urgent home repairs, never repaid. The list continued page after page. In total, according to my calculations, I had loaned them $23,400 in the last 5 years. Money that had come from my modest widow's pension, from the sewing jobs I still did for some neighbors, from the sale of some old furniture that had sentimental value to me. They had never repaid me a single cent, and what was worse, they had never mentioned those debts again, as if the money had been swallowed by a black hole of selective convenience. That night I called Matthew. I needed to know if he at least remembered all those times he had come to me, when his own capital wasn't enough to cover his expenses. "Mom, what's going on now?" he replied with the tone of someone being interrupted from something more important. "Matthew, honey, I was reviewing my papers and—" "Papers? What papers? Mom, please don't tell me you're at it again with your strange things of organizing old documents." "They're not strange things, Matthew. They're the loans I've made to you over the years. Do you remember?" There was a pause, then a dry laugh that chilled my blood. "Loans? Mom, those weren't loans. It was mother-to-son money. Mothers don't charge their children interest, do they?" "I'm not talking about interest, Matthew. I'm talking about repayment. They were loans. You yourself called them that." "Mom, frankly, I don't remember saying I was going to pay you back anything. And even if I did, things change. I have a family to support, a mortgage to pay. I can't be thinking about money that I took for granted was a gift." Gift. He had transformed my sacrifices into retroactive gifts. He had rewritten history to absolve his conscience. "Matthew, that money was my emergency savings. I live on $950 a month from my pension." "And you live fine with that, Mom. You have your apartment paid off. You don't have big expenses. Elaine and I have real responsibilities, families who depend on us, projects that require capital investment. Real responsibilities. As if maintaining my own dignity, as if surviving on a minimum pension, as if existing without being a burden to anyone were not real responsibilities. Besides," Matthew continued with that coldness he had perfected during his years as a financial advisor, "I think these kinds of conversations are exactly what we were talking about the other day. Mom, you need to understand that we are no longer children. We can't be justifying every dollar we spend with you." That night, after hanging up, I sat in my small kitchen and calculated how many dinners I had skipped making for myself to be able to lend them that money. How many times had I bought the cheapest brand of everything at the local grocery store to be able to help them with their emergencies? How many nights had I used an extra blanket instead of turning on the heat to save on the gas bill and have something saved in case they needed me? I had become my own victim, a woman who had denied herself small basic luxuries so that her children could afford whims they called necessities. On Friday morning, while having my latte in front of the window, I watched a neighbor walking with her granddaughter. The girl, about 6 years old, ran toward her shouting, "Grandma! Grandma!" With that pure joy I remembered in my own grandchildren. But that was before, when I was still useful as a free babysitter, as a Sunday cook, as an emergency financier. Now that I had nothing left to offer except unconditional love, I had discovered that unconditional love had no market value in my children's family economy. That afternoon, I bought a lottery ticket at Mrs. Riley's newsstand on the corner of my street. I didn't do it out of hope, but out of habit, because I had always bought one on Saturdays when Anthony was alive. I chose the same numbers I had played for 30 years, our dates of birth and our children's, 7, 14, 23, 31, 42, 49. I didn't know that those numbers were about to reveal who I truly was to the people I had loved unconditionally, and who they really were to me. Saturday dawned gray, with those low clouds that New York has in October, and that make even the air seem heavier. I woke up with a strange pain in my chest, not physical, but something deeper, as if my soul had developed arthritis after so many years carrying the weight of expectations that were never met. I had slept poorly again. In my dreams, I saw my grandchildren playing in a park, but when I tried to approach, they ran towards other grandmothers, smiling women whose arms were full of gifts and pockets full of money to buy ice cream. I was left alone next to the empty swings, with my hands extended toward no one. I prepared my usual breakfast, latte, 2 slices of toast with a little olive oil and a pinch of salt. The same breakfast I had eaten for 40 years, since Anthony and I established our marriage routines. But now, every bite tasted like loneliness. Every sip of coffee was a reminder that I no longer had anyone to share the small morning conversations with that had given meaning to my days. While having breakfast, I heard my upstairs neighbors arguing about money. He was shouting something about failed investments, and she was responding with tears in her voice about overdue mortgages. It was strange how the lack of money could destroy love, but also how the presence of money could reveal it as false. My own children had never argued with me about money when they needed it. They simply showed up with their perfectly constructed emergencies, with their financial explanations that sounded so technical that I felt ignorant for questioning them. Matthew especially had perfected the art of making his requests sound like investment opportunities that I would be lucky to take advantage of. "Mom, I've been offered a chance to participate in a private equity fund with guaranteed returns of 15% annually," he had told me last time. "If you lend me $5,000 now, in 1 year I'll return $5,750 to you. It's practically free money." I, who had worked all my life with sewing machines and needles, understood nothing about funds or private equity, but I trusted my son, his college education, his expensive suits, and his financial vocabulary that made me feel like a peasant at a banker's meeting. I never saw the original $5,000, nor the $750 of supposed returns. That morning, while washing the breakfast dishes, I remembered a conversation I had with my mother years before she died. We were sitting in her kitchen, that old kitchen with blue tiles, where I had learned to make meatballs and gravy, and where she had taught me the first lessons about life. "Carol," she had told me with that tired wisdom of someone who had lived too much, "be careful not to confuse love with habit. Sometimes people get so used to us giving to them that they forget to be thankful, and then they forget to value it, and finally, they forget to love." I had thought my mother was too pessimistic, that maternal love was different, that it was stronger than human weaknesses. How wrong I had been. I decided to go for a walk. The fresh air would help me clear my mind, and I needed to buy a few things at the Greenwich Village Market. As I walked through the cobblestone streets of the neighborhood, I watched families strolling together, young parents pushing baby strollers, grandparents my age walking hand in hand with grandchildren who were jumping for joy beside them. A bitter envy rose in my throat, not envy for what they had, but for what I had lost, without even realizing when it had happened. At the market, while buying tomatoes and green beans, I overheard 2 women my age talking about their children. "My Alexander calls me every day," one said, her eyes shining with pride. "Yesterday he told me he had saved enough money to take me on a trip to San Francisco this summer." The other woman smiled knowingly. "You're so lucky." My Rose is like that, too. Last month she gave me a gold chain because she said I deserved something nice. I kept walking among the stalls, pretending to examine the vegetables while absorbing every word of that conversation that hurt me like salt on an open wound. When was the last time my children had given me a gift that wasn't my birthday or Christmas? When had they thought of me just because they felt like making me happy? I couldn't remember. I bought what I needed to make a turkey chili, even though I knew I would eat it alone for 3 days. Cooking was still my way of feeling useful, even if I no longer had anyone to cook for with love. On the way back home, I passed Mrs. Riley's newsstand. She was an older woman than I was, perhaps 75 years old, who had recently become a widow but always had a smile for her customers. Her small shop smelled of tobacco and the magazines she sold, an aroma that reminded me of simpler times. "Carol, honey," she said when I entered. "The usual?" I nodded and gave her the $2 for the lottery ticket. My fingers brushed the paper as she handed it to me, and for a moment I felt a strange sensation, as if that little piece of paper were more important than it seemed. "Have you chosen the special numbers again?" Mrs. Riley asked me while marking the numbers on the machine. "Yes, the same as always, the family birth dates." She looked at me with an expression I couldn't interpret. "Sometimes numbers have their own luck, Carol. Sometimes things change when we least expect it." I put the ticket in my wallet, between the faded photo of Anthony and my public library card. I didn't think about it again until Sunday night, when I was watching the news on my small television while eating a bowl of homemade soup. The anchor announced, "The winning numbers for this week's drawing are 7, 14, 23, 31, 42, 49. I dropped my spoon in the bowl. The sound of metal against ceramic resonated in my silent apartment like a chime. I got up so fast I felt dizzy, and with trembling hands I searched for my wallet. I took out the ticket and compared it with the numbers that were still on the television screen. 7, 14, 23, 31, 42, 49. Exactly the same. I sat on the sofa with the ticket in my hands, and for the first time in weeks, a smile appeared on my face. It wasn't a smile of joy. Not yet. It was a strange, mysterious smile, like someone who has just discovered they have an ace hidden up their sleeve. $23 million. The anchor continued talking about the prize, about the lucky winner who hadn't yet come forward to claim their fortune, but I was no longer listening. My mind was busy imagining something very different. I imagined the faces of Matthew and Elaine when they found out. I imagined their desperate calls, their sudden visits, their elaborate excuses to explain why they had been so cruel to me. I imagined their pleas, their promises to change, their attempts to recover the love they had wasted. But above all, I imagined my own response. For the first time in 60 years, Carol Hope Morrison had something her children wanted more than her absence: money. A lot of money. And for the first time in my life, I was going to decide exactly what to do with something that completely belonged to me. The game was about to change, and this time I was going to write the rules. I stayed awake all night with the lottery ticket on the nightstand, as if it were a sacred relic that could disappear if I stopped watching it. Every time I closed my eyes, the numbers 7, 14, 23, 31, 42, 49 appeared engraved on my eyelids like a divine revelation. $23 million. It was a figure so large that my mind couldn't fully process it. Throughout my life, I had counted money in $20 and $50 bills. I had calculated expenses in cents. I had lived with the constant worry that my pension wouldn't be enough to make it to the end of the month. Now, suddenly, I had more money than I could spend in 100 lifetimes. But the strangest thing was that the joy I expected to feel wasn't coming. Instead, there was a cold, calculating feeling that I didn't recognize in myself. It was as if the prize had awakened a different Carol, a woman who had been asleep for 60 years and who was now opening her eyes with terrible clarity. On Monday morning, I called the bank to verify that the ticket was authentic and to ask about the procedures for claiming the prize. The employee who helped me, a young girl with a southern accent, congratulated me with such enthusiasm that I had to move the phone away from my ear. "Mrs. Morrison, what incredible luck. Have you thought about what you're going to do with so much money?" I didn't tell her I already had a very clear idea. During Tuesday, while processing the paperwork at the state lottery offices, I found myself observing the officials who were assisting me. They all treated me with a deference I had never experienced before. Broader smiles. "Do you need anything else, Mrs. Morrison? Allow me to help you with that chair. Would you like a coffee while we wait?" It was fascinating and repulsive at the same time. I was still the same woman I had been on Sunday morning, but now that they knew about my new wealth, suddenly I had become visible, important, worthy of respect. Was that how my own children saw me? As someone whose value depended solely on what I could offer them? On Wednesday afternoon, while organizing the prize documents on my kitchen table, the phone rang. It was Matthew. "Mom, how are you?" His voice sounded different, warmer, more attentive, as if he had suddenly remembered he had a mother. "I'm fine, honey. How are you?" "Well, Mom, I've been thinking a lot about our last conversation. I think I was too hard on you. Ruth has been telling me that I should call you more often." Ruth, his wife, who in 5 years of marriage to Matthew had barely addressed more than 10 sentences to me consecutively, had had an epiphany about the importance of family relationships. "That's good, Matthew. I'm glad to know Ruth is thinking of me." "Yeah. And look, I was thinking, how about we all come over for lunch on Sunday? You cook that turkey chili you make so well, and we'll bring dessert and wine, like in the old days." Like in the old days, when I was useful as a free cook and host for family gatherings, where no one asked me how I really was, where my grandchildren played in my living room while the adults talked about their jobs, their investments, their plans for the future in which I didn't appear anywhere. "I don't know, Matthew. I've been very busy lately." There was a pause. I could imagine the surprise on his face. His mother, who for years had accepted any crumb of attention he wanted to give her, suddenly had plans of her own. Busy? With what? "With my life, honey. You know those things you said I should do, getting hobbies, living my own life." "Well, but family is still important, isn't it? Don't tell me you're going to be one of those bitter women who cut off contact with their children now." Bitter. As if my pain over their abandonment were an emotional whim, as if my need for respect were the eccentricity of a bitter old woman. "I'm not bitter, Matthew. I'm just learning to value my time." It's okay. I understand. But look, there's something else. Ruth and I have been talking, and we'd like to ask your advice about something. Could we come over tomorrow afternoon?" Advice. Another word my children used when they needed something, but wanted it to sound like they were doing me a favor by including me in their lives. Advice about what? Well, it's a bit of a sensitive topic. We prefer to talk about it in person. On Thursday afternoon, Matthew and Ruth appeared at my door with practiced smiles and a box of pastries from the most expensive bakery on the Upper East Side. Pastries that cost more than I spent on food in 3 days, but which they now brought as if it were an offering to soften my heart. Ruth was wearing a dress I recognized from the fashion magazines I sometimes leafed through at the hair salon. Her handbag was one of those brands that appeared in television commercials, and her watch shone with the kind of brilliance only real gold gives. "Carol," Ruth said to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "it's good to see you. You look great. Have you lost weight?" I hadn't lost weight. If anything, I had lost my appetite since my children had discarded me like a useless object. But Ruth needed to start the conversation with false compliments, to prepare the ground for what they had really come to ask. We sat in my small living room, them on the sofa, and me in my usual armchair, the one that had been Anthony's and retained the shape of his body like a permanent hug. "Mom," Matthew began, "what we want to consult you about is an investment issue." Of course, everything always came back to money with them. It turns out that a unique opportunity has presented itself to us. A friend of Ruth's, who works at a very prestigious investment bank, has offered us a chance to participate in a venture capital fund that is investing in cryptocurrencies, specifically in Bitcoin, and other digital currencies that are experiencing exponential growth. The words came out of his mouth like a rehearsed speech. Venture capital, cryptocurrencies, exponential growth. The same financial vocabulary he had used other times to confuse me and make me feel ignorant. "The problem," Ruth continued, taking over with the precision of a corporate presentation, is that it requires a minimum investment of $50,000. We have $30,000 saved, but we need $20,000 more to complete the amount. $50,000. The exact amount I had spent on them over the years, counting never repaid loans, gifts for the grandchildren, paid dinners, and expenses I had assumed without question. It's an opportunity that won't be repeated, Matthew added, leaning forward with that intensity he reserved for important occasions. The projected returns are 300% in 2 years. If we invest now, in 2025, we would have $150,000. And of course, Ruth hurried to clarify, you would be a partner in the investment. We would return the $20,000 to you, plus your proportional share of the profits. Partner, as if it were a business decision between equals, as if my money were respected and valued, as if they considered me capable of understanding the risks and benefits of such an investment. I looked at both of them, sitting on my sofa, with their expensive clothes and their calculated smiles, and I felt a strange calm take over me. It was the calm of someone who finally sees with absolute clarity, of someone who understands that they have been living in an illusion for too long. That's very interesting, I told them with a smile that I practiced mentally before showing it. Very interesting indeed. Matthew visibly relaxed. Right? We knew you would understand. You've always been very smart about these things. Smart about these things. After subtly calling me ignorant for years, now he discovered I was financially smart. Let me think about it for a few days, I told them. It's a lot of money. Of course, Mom, take your time, but not too long because the opportunity has a deadline. Of course it had a deadline. Emotional scams are always rushed. After they left, I stayed seated in my armchair, watching the sun set through my window. My children had just confirmed exactly what I already knew. To them, I wasn't a mother. I was a source of emergency funding, a family bank that never charged interest and had the most flexible loan policy in the world. But now things had changed. Now I had $23 million, and they didn't know it. The game had begun, and for the first time in my life, I had all the winning cards. For the next few days, I watched as my children deployed their strategy with the precision of a military campaign. Elaine showed up on Friday afternoon, unannounced, with a bottle of California Cabernet that cost more than I spent on a week's groceries. Mom, I was passing by and thought of you, she told me with that smile she had perfected in her business meetings, the one she used to convince clients to invest their wealth in financial products she sold them. Passing by. My apartment was on a dead-end street in Old Bushwick. No one passed by here, on the way to nowhere, especially someone who lived in a luxury penthouse on the Upper East Side and worked in the Midtown Financial District. What a coincidence, Elaine. How are things at the bank? Very well, very well. In fact, it's been an excellent year. The markets have responded better than expected, and our clients are seeing very satisfactory returns on their investment portfolios. Elaine worked as an investment advisor at a private bank, helping people get richer. She always spoke of her clients with a reverence she had never shown toward her own mother. To her, I was simply Carol, the widow who lived on a modest pension. But her clients were sophisticated investors whose financial decisions deserved respect and attention. Matthew told me he proposed a very interesting investment opportunity to you, she continued, pouring the wine into my crystal glasses, the good ones I only used for special occasions, and which hadn't seen such expensive wine in years. Yes? He told me about cryptocurrencies and things like that. Exactly. Look, Mom, I know it's hard for your generation to understand these new financial instruments, but believe me when I tell you that the future of money is in digital currencies. My most successful clients, the ones who really know how to multiply their capital, are diversifying their portfolios with Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other high-potential cryptocurrencies. My generation. As if being 60 years old had automatically made me incapable of understanding concepts she mastered because she had a college degree that I had paid for by selling my mother's jewelry. That's fascinating, I said, taking a sip of the wine. It was delicious, of course. Everything my children bought was top quality, especially when they wanted something from me. What Matthew didn't explain well, Elaine continued, leaning forward with that intensity she reserved for closing important deals, is that this isn't just any investment. The venture capital fund that has offered us participation is led by former executives from Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, people who manage the wealth of multimillionaires. Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, names that sounded important. Institutions that inspired respect. Elaine knew exactly what words to use to impress someone who didn't understand high-level financial world. "And have you investigated these people?" I asked with genuine curiosity. "Of course, Mom. I've verified all their backgrounds. I've reviewed the legal documents of the fund. I've analyzed the performance projections. Everything is in order. It's an opportunity that is normally only available to clients with assets over $1 million, but they are offering it to us because of Ruth's contact." $1 million. The figure floated in the air between us like an invisible barrier. Elaine was telling me, without saying it directly, that I didn't belong to the world of people who normally had access to these opportunities, that it was a favor, an exception, a door ajar to the exclusive world of the truly wealthy. "It sounds very tempting," I told her, "but $20,000 is a lot of my savings. Mom, look at it this way. If you do nothing with your savings, in 2 years you will still have the same amount, but it will have lost value due to inflation. On the other hand, if you invest with us, in 2 years you could have $60,000. That's money you could use to travel, to give yourself small luxuries, to have the retirement you deserve." The retirement I deserved. As if my current retirement, living modestly on my pension, and the small sewing jobs I still did, were inadequate, sad, something that needed to be improved. "Besides," she added with a smile that was meant to be affectionate but didn't reach her eyes, "Matthew and I have been talking a lot about you lately. We realize that we have been too absorbed in our own lives, too focused on work and family. We want you to know that this is going to change." This is going to change. How convenient that they had had this revelation exactly when they needed $20,000 from my bank account. "We want to include you more in our lives," Elaine continued. "The children always ask about you, you know. Laura told me the other day, 'Mom, why don't we see Grandma more?' And I realized she was right. You've been a wonderful mother, and now we want to be better children." Laura, my 8-year-old granddaughter, who according to Elaine missed me and asked about me. The same Laura who the last time I saw her, 3 months ago, had spent the entire visit glued to her tablet, without lifting her eyes even once to talk to me. But now, magically, she had become a nostalgic granddaughter who yearned to spend time with her grandmother. "I'm very happy to hear that, Elaine. And look, to show you we're serious, Matthew and I have decided that when we recover the investment, we want to take you on a trip. We were thinking of a week in Hawaii, in a 5-star hotel. All expenses paid, of course. It's the least we can do after all the years you worked so hard for us. A trip to Hawaii, as a reward for lending them money they would never return, for an investment that probably didn't exist, managed by people who were perhaps as real as the 300% returns they promised. But the saddest part wasn't the scam itself. The saddest part was realizing that my own children thought I was so naive, so desperate for their affection, so in need of their attention, that I would accept any promise, no matter how absurd, just to feel included in their lives. "That's a very generous proposal," I finally told them. Elaine smiled with relief. "So, are you going to participate?" "Let me think about it over the weekend. It's an important decision." "Of course, Mom. But remember that Monday is the last day to confirm participation. After that, the fund closes, and we'll have to wait until the next quarter." Monday. There was always a rush when it came to separating people from their money. Real opportunities could wait, could be analyzed, consulted. Scams needed urgency, pressure, the feeling that if you didn't act immediately, you would lose something valuable forever. After Elaine left, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of chamomile tea and reflected on the conversation. My children had perfected their technique over the years. They knew exactly which emotional buttons to push. My loneliness, my desire to be included, my insecurity about financial matters, my love unconditional toward them. But there was something they didn't know, something that would completely change the balance of power in this negotiation. I had $23 million waiting for me in a bank account, and they were still treating me as if I were a desperate widow who would be honored to lend them her last savings. On Saturday morning, while having coffee on my balcony and watching the neighborhood wake up, I made a decision. It wasn't a decision about the money. That was clear to me from the start. It was a decision about something much more important, about who I really was, and what kind of relationship I wanted to have with my children from now on. It was time to teach them that their mother wasn't as naive as they thought, and that a mother's love, although powerful, was not infinite when systematically abused. Sunday was going to be a very interesting day in the Morrison family. Sunday arrived with that strange clarity that New York sometimes has in November, when the cold air cleans the streets and makes everything look sharper, more real. I woke up early. I took a careful shower and chose my best dress, the navy blue one I had bought for Matthew's wedding 5 years ago, and which since then I had only worn for special occasions. Today was a special occasion, even if they didn't know it yet. I prepared coffee for everyone, set the table with my best dishes, those white porcelain ones with gold flowers that I had inherited from my mother-in-law and which I only brought out when I wanted a meal to be memorable. Because this meal was going to be memorable, I was sure of that. At 12 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. Matthew arrived first, with Ruth and the children. Paul, 10 years old, entered running towards my television without even greeting me, while Sophia, 7, hid behind her mother's legs as if I were a stranger. "Mom, it smells so good in here," Matthew said, giving me a kiss on the cheek that lasted exactly the socially acceptable time. "Did you make chili?" "Of course. I knew it was your favorite." Ruth handed me a bottle of red wine that I recognized from television commercials. It was one of those brands that appeared in luxury magazines, with prices that I associated more with a monthly apartment rent than with a bottle of wine. "Carol, I hope you like it. It's a high-end Napa Valley Cabernet, a special vintage." Elaine arrived 15 minutes later, with her husband Jonathan and their 2 daughters, Laura and Carol, who bore my name, but looked at me as if she didn't quite understand why she had to be here instead of at home playing with her friends. "Grandma," Laura told me, with that formality that children use when their parents have ordered them to be polite, "Mom says we missed you a lot." "I miss you too, honey." But as I said the words, I realized it was no longer completely true. During these weeks of silence, I had started to get used to the tranquility of my apartment, to the pleasure of making decisions without having to consult anyone, to the freedom of not feeling constantly evaluated and judged by people who had decided that my value depended solely on what I could give them. We sat at the table, and for a moment everything seemed normal. The children played with their phones between bites, the adults talked about work, the weather, plans for the Christmas holidays. It was a perfect family scene, the kind of Sunday I had dreamed of during all those weeks of loneliness. But beneath the casual conversation, I could feel the tension. Matthew and Elaine exchanged glances, waiting for the right moment to address the topic that had really brought them here. Ruth smiled too much, and Jonathan seemed uncomfortable, as if he knew he was participating in something that didn't quite like, but didn't have the courage to question. It was after dessert when Matthew finally cast the hook. "Mom, have you thought about what we talked about regarding the investment?" "Yes, I've been thinking a lot." And Elaine leaned forward, with that expression I had seen 1,000 times when she was little and wanted something special for her birthday. "Well, it's a very important decision. $20,000 is all my savings." "We know, Mom, and that's precisely why we want to make sure it's a good investment," Matthew said, with that voice he used when he wanted to sound paternal and protective. "We wouldn't ask this of you if we weren't completely sure you're going to make money." "In fact," Elaine added, "we've been talking, and we've decided that we want to offer you something more than just a partnership in the investment. We want to offer you a place in our lives, a place in their lives, as if until now I had been a temporary tenant in a family relationship that they completely controlled." "What do you mean?" "We want you to know that from now on, things are going to be different. We're going to include you in all important family decisions. Sundays are going to be sacred for getting together here, with you. The children are going to spend more time with you." Ruth nodded enthusiastically. "We were thinking you could watch Paul and Sophia some afternoons after school. That way you help us, and you have more contact with your grandchildren." Watching the children. After calling me a bother, after saying I had already lived my life, Now they wanted to turn me into a free babysitter in exchange for lending them my last savings. That sounds wonderful, I told them, and I could see how they all visibly relaxed. But I have one question. Is this investment in cryptocurrencies completely safe? Mom, in investments, there are never 100% guarantees, Elaine explained, with that exaggerated patience she used with her less sophisticated clients. But this is one of the most solid opportunities I've seen in my 10 years working in the financial sector. The projected returns are conservative compared to what some cryptocurrencies have achieved in recent years. And what if I lose the money? Matthew and Elaine looked at each other, and I saw a shadow of irritation cross both their faces. Mom, you're not going to lose the money, Matthew said firmly. But if for some extraordinary reason something went wrong, we would take responsibility. We'd return the $20,000 to you from our own resources. Really? Of course. We're family. Family. How easy it was to use that word when they needed something from me. I got up from the table and went to my bedroom. I'm going to get my bank account documents so we can see exactly how much I have available. I heard them whispering to each other while I was in the bedroom, fragments of conversation that reached me like involuntary confessions. She's more receptive than I thought. We only have until tomorrow. After this, it's going to be easier. I returned to the living room with a folder in my hands and sat in my armchair, facing all of them who were watching me from the sofa as if I were the protagonist of a show they had been waiting to see. I've been thinking a lot about what you told me, I began, opening the folder slowly. About being a family, about including me in your lives, about this investment that's going to change everything. Mom, we knew you would understand, Elaine said with a smile of triumph, and I've come to a conclusion. I took the first document out of the folder. It wasn't my bank statement. It was a copy of the contract I had signed at the state lottery offices. During these weeks that you've been too busy to call me, too absorbed in your own lives to remember you have a mother, something interesting happened. Matthew frowned. What thing? I won the lottery. The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear the ticking of the kitchen clock, the distant murmur of street traffic, the accelerated breathing of my own children. How do you mean you won the lottery? Elaine asked with a trembling voice. $23 million, I said, with the same calm with which I would have announced that I had bought bread. The numbers I always play, the family birth dates. Ruth brought a hand to her mouth. Jonathan dropped his wine glass. The children, for the first time all afternoon, looked up from their devices. Mom, are you serious? Matthew had turned pale as if he were sick. Completely serious. Here are all the documents. The transfer will be effective on Wednesday. Elaine stood up so fast that her chair wobbled. Mom, this is incredible. We're talking about a fortune. You'll never have to worry about money again. I won't have to worry about many things, I confirmed. Matthew had also stood up, and I could see in his eyes the same expression he had had as a child when he discovered there were Christmas presents under the tree. Mom, this changes everything. With that amount of money, you could invest in high-yield funds, in properties, in shares of multi-million-dollar companies. You could triple your wealth in 5 years. You could buy a bigger house, Ruth added, a house where we could all visit you more comfortably, where the children would have room to play. You could pay for the best private colleges for your grandchildren, Elaine suggested. Give them the opportunities that we couldn't give them. And there it was. In less than 5 minutes, they had transformed my prize into a list of responsibilities towards them. It wasn't my money to enjoy, to travel, to give myself the small luxuries I had never been able to afford. It was a family resource that had to be administered intelligently for the benefit of everyone. Everyone except me. It's fascinating, I told them, putting the documents back in the folder. It's fascinating to see how your love for me appears and disappears in exact proportion to what you think I can give you. Silence fell back upon the living room like a heavy blanket. Mom, what do you mean? Matthew asked cautiously. I mean that now I'm going to teach you exactly what it means to value someone for something more than their money. And for the first time in 60 years, Carol Hope Morrison was going to demonstrate that real power doesn't come from how much you have, but from how much you are willing to keep for yourself. The transformation on their faces was immediate and brutal. Matthew, who seconds earlier had been mentally calculating how to convince me to lend him $20,000, now looked at me as if he had just discovered that his mother was the owner of a multinational empire. Elaine had adopted that professional expression she used with her most important clients, that mixture of respect and greed she had perfected over years managing other people's wealth. "Mom," Matthew said, approaching my armchair with that reverence he normally reserved for his bosses at the bank. This is extraordinary. Do you realize what this means?" "What does it mean, Matthew?" "It means you don't have to live here anymore, in this small apartment. You could buy a house in Greenwich, Connecticut, with a yard, with a pool. The grandchildren could come spend their summers with you." "The same grandchildren who barely greeted me 5 minutes ago?" Elaine quickly intervened, as if she were a professional mediator trying to salvage a complicated negotiation. "Mom, the children are young. They don't know how to express their feelings, but they adore you. Believe me." "Adore me?" "Laura, honey," I addressed my 8-year-old granddaughter, who had been glued to her tablet throughout the meal. "Do you adore me?" Laura looked up for the first time all afternoon, confused by the direct question. Yes, Grandma." "And what do you like most about me?" The girl looked at her mother for help, but Elaine was too nervous to give her clues. "Well, that you make good food." That I made good food. That was my most adorable quality according to my own granddaughter. Not my love, not my wisdom, not the stories I told them or the gifts I gave them. My value as a grandmother was reduced to my culinary ability. "Very interesting," I said, smiling at Laura with a tenderness that surprised even me. It wasn't the girl's fault for having been educated to see me as a provider of domestic services. Ruth, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally found her voice. "Carol, this is a blessing. With that amount of money, you could secure the future of the entire family. You could pay for the children's colleges, help us with our mortgages, invest in properties that generate passive income for everyone." Passive income for everyone. How generous my daughter-in-law was, distributing my money among the family as if it were an inheritance she was administering on my behalf. "And what about my future, Ruth? What about my dreams, the things I'd like to do with the money I won?" "Well, of course you would be the main beneficiary," Matthew rushed to clarify. "But we could help you administer it intelligently. I have contacts in private banking. Elaine understands sophisticated investments. Together, we could multiply your wealth." Together. As if my money was now a family project, a collective company where I would be the majority shareholder, but they would be the executive directors. "Matthew, do you remember what you told me 2 weeks ago on the phone?" "What thing?" "You told me you had lived my life, that it was time for you to let us live yours." Matthew became visibly uncomfortable. "Mom, I was stressed that day. I didn't mean... You told me I was in the way. It was a misunderstanding." "Matthew, and what has changed since then? What exactly has changed?" Elaine stood up and approached me, adopting that posture I had seen 1,000 times when she wanted something important. "Mom, we've reflected a lot on that conversation. We realized we had made a terrible mistake." "And when did you realize it? Before or after finding out I had won the lottery?" The silence that followed was so dense that I could physically feel it, like a pressure on my chest that made breathing difficult. "Mom," Matthew finally said, "I understand you're hurt. I understand you feel like we haven't treated you well, and you're right. But this is an opportunity for all of us to start over." "Start over?" "Yes, a new stage where we are all more aware of how important you are to us, where your well-being is our priority. My well-being. How curious how my well-being had risen on their priority list in exact proportion to the zeros in my bank account." I got up from the armchair and walked toward the window of my small living room. From there, I could see the street where I had lived for 15 years, the neighborhood I knew like the back of my hand, the simple life I had built after becoming a widow. "Do you know what the saddest thing about all this is?" I told them without turning around. "It's not that you tried to scam me. It's not that you lied about an investment that probably doesn't exist. It's not even that you treated me like an idiot." "Mom, The saddest thing is that you proved that the love you feel for me has a market price, that your capacity to value me as a person is directly related to my ability to finance your lives." I turned around to look at them. They were all tense, awaiting the verdict of a judge who had just discovered she had the power to change their lives forever. For 60 years, I believed that a mother's love was unconditional, and I was right, it is. But I've discovered that the love of children, that's another story. "Carol," Jonathan said, speaking for the first time all afternoon, "I think you're being too harsh. The kids made mistakes, but family is family." "Do you think so, Jonathan? And when was the last time you called me without Elaine forcing you? When was the last time any of you worried about whether I was okay, if I needed anything, if I felt lonely?" Jonathan looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "I'm going to do something I should have done many years ago," I continued. "I'm going to teach you what it feels like when someone you love treats you exactly the way you treated me." "What do you mean?" Elaine asked with a trembling voice. "I mean, I'm going to donate all the money." The collective cry that rose in my living room would have been comical if it hadn't been so revealing. Matthew turned white as the wall. Elaine put her hands to her head. Ruth murmured, "Oh my God," as if she had just witnessed a tragedy. "Not all of it," I clarified calmly. "I'm going to keep enough to live comfortably for the rest of my days, to travel, to give myself the small luxuries I've never been able to afford, to not depend financially on anyone." "And the rest?" Matthew asked in a hoarse voice. "The rest is going to a foundation that helps elderly women who have been abandoned by their families, women who, like me, have discovered that their value was measured only by what they could give, not by what they were." Elaine started to cry, not the elegant tears she shed in romantic movies, but the desperate sobbing of someone who had just watched a fortune they had already mentally spent disappear. "Mom, you can't do this. It's our future. It's your grandchildren's future." "Our future? When did the money I won become your future?" Matthew approached me with his hands outstretched, as if trying to calm a person in crisis. "Mom, I understand you're angry. I understand you want to punish us, but this is too extreme. Think about it carefully." "I've been thinking about it for 2 weeks, Matthew, since the day you told me I was in the way, and I've come to a very clear conclusion." "Which is?" "That I can't buy your love, but I'm not going to keep paying for your contempt either." The children had completely dropped their devices and were watching us with that morbid fascination that children feel for adult dramas. Their parents, for the first time in years, had completely lost control of the situation. "The donation papers are already signed." I lied with a tranquility that surprised me. "The transfer goes into effect on Friday." "No!" Elaine screamed, standing up so violently that she knocked over her chair. "You can't do this! We're your family!" "Now we are family," I told them, smiling for the first time since the conversation had begun, "when there's no money involved." And for the first time in my life, I felt what it was like to have absolute control over my own existence. The days that followed that revelation were the strangest of my life. For the first time in 60 years, my phone wasn't ringing with family emergencies, with requests disguised as concern, with invitations that came with unspoken expectations. The silence was absolute. And I discovered that I liked it. I hadn't actually donated all the money, of course. That had been my first strategic lie, and I was surprised at how natural it had felt. I had set aside $5 million for myself, an amount that would allow me to live like a queen until I was 100 years old, and I had donated effectively $10 million to a real foundation that helped women in situations similar to mine. The remaining $8 million I had put in a separate account, waiting to see what would happen. On Wednesday morning, while having coffee in a new ritual I had adopted, real coffee from an Italian coffee maker I had bought on a whim, the doorbell rang. It was Matthew, but not the executive Matthew who had come on Sunday. This Matthew had dark circles under his eyes, wrinkled clothes, and that expression of defeat that only appears when someone realizes they have lost something important forever. "Mom," he said when I opened the door, "we need to talk." "Oh, of course, come in." He sat on the sofa where he had been on Sunday, but now he seemed shrunken, smaller. "Mom, I've been thinking all week about what happened. And I think you're right. Those 4 words floated in the air between us like a confession that had taken 42 years to arrive. What am I right about, Matthew? About everything. About the fact that you treated me badly? That we only remembered you when we needed something? That, his voice cracked slightly, that we've been the worst children in the world? I waited. After decades of being interrupted, of my words being considered less important than the urgencies of others, I had learned the power of silence. I didn't sleep all week, he continued. Ruth has been asking me what's wrong, and I didn't know how to explain to her that I had just realized my mother hated me, and that she had every reason in the world to do so. I don't hate you, Matthew. You should. I hate myself. It was strange to see my oldest son, that man who managed millions of other people's dollars with absolute confidence, crying on my sofa like the scared child he had been when his father left us. Do you know what hurts me the most? He asked me through tears. It's not the money, Mom. It's realizing that during all these years I had the best mother in the world, and I was too much of an idiot to value her. Matthew, no. Let me talk. Let me say the things I should have said years ago. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, as he did when he was 8 years old. Do you remember when Dad left and I thought we were going to end up on the street? You worked at that factory late into the night. You came home with your fingers swollen from so much sewing, and you still helped me with my homework. I remember. Of course I remember. And when I wanted to study at the most expensive college in New York, you sold Grandma's jewelry without saying a word of complaint. Was that what you had to do? No, it wasn't what you had to do. It was what you chose to do because you loved us more than we deserved. He stood up and began to pace my small living room like a caged animal. And how did I repay you? By becoming the kind of man who only calls his mother when he needs money. Matthew, sit down. I can't sit down. I can't be still knowing that I lost my mother because I was a greedy jerk. He stopped in front of my window, looking out at the street where he had played as a child, where he had learned to ride a bike while I ran behind him shouting to be careful. Do you know what I told Ruth last night? I told her that if I had to choose between the $23 million and getting my mother back, I would choose my mother without thinking twice. And what did she tell you? Matthew laughed bitterly. She told me I was being dramatic, that after all, you were old and only had a few years left anyway. As if my remaining years were a clearance discount in a store, something that had to be quickly used up before it lost all its value. That night, I knew I had married a woman who was exactly like the person I had become, and I was disgusted with myself. On Thursday, Elaine came. Unlike Matthew, she came prepared for war. She brought documents, printouts of articles about pension funds, statistics on longevity and geriatric care. Mom, I've been doing some research, she told me without preamble, spreading papers over my kitchen table as if it were a business presentation. A woman your age has a life expectancy of approximately 20 more years. With a modest pension and the medical expenses that are inevitably going to arise, you need at least $2 million to maintain a decent standard of living. Elaine, let me finish. I've calculated that with a donation of $21 million, you're going to be in a very vulnerable financial situation in your last years. It's irresponsible from every point of view. It was fascinating to watch her work. Elaine had converted my decision to donate my money into a mathematical problem that she could solve with the cold logic of her professional financial analysis. Furthermore, she continued, I've consulted with lawyers specializing in family law. A donation of that magnitude, made under emotional pressure, can be legally challenged if it is proven that you were not of sound mind when you decided it. Are you threatening to have me declared mentally incompetent? I'm offering you rational alternatives to an emotional decision. I looked at her for a long moment. At this daughter I had raised with so much love, whom I had educated to be independent and strong, and who was now using that strength to manipulate me in the most sophisticated way possible. Elaine, do you know the difference between you and Matthew? Which one? He came yesterday to apologize. You've come to find a legal way to take control of my own money away from me. I came to protect you from a decision you will regret. No, you came to protect your own future financial interests. Elaine put the papers away with abrupt movements, defeated by the clarity of my observation. Mom, are you really going to punish us forever for a few mistakes? I'm not punishing you, Elaine. I'm teaching you. Teaching us what? That love can't be bought, that respect isn't negotiable, and that a mother, no matter how much she loves her children, also deserves to be loved for who she is, not for what she can give. 6 months later, my life had changed completely. I lived in the same apartment, but now I had an assistant who came twice a week, not because I needed her, but because I could afford her, and because I liked coming home and finding everything impeccable without having had to do it myself. I had started traveling, small trips at first, a weekend in Boston, a week in Miami, then more adventurous ones. A month in South America visiting a distant cousin I hadn't seen in 30 years. 2 weeks in California with a group of women my age who had decided that their 60s were the perfect time to discover the world. Matthew called me every week. At first, they were awkward conversations, full of apologies and attempts to recover a relationship that we had damaged for years. But slowly, we had started to get to know each other as adults, as individuals separate from the financial transactions that had defined our interactions for too long. Elaine took longer to accept the new rules of the game. For months, she tried different strategies to convince me to reconsider the donation. When she realized I wasn't going to change my opinion, she went through a phase of rage, then silence, and finally, a resigned acceptance that gradually transformed into something resembling respect. One spring Sunday, while watering my geraniums on the balcony, the doorbell rang. It was Laura, my granddaughter, alone. "Grandma," she said when I opened the door, "can I come in? Mom doesn't know I'm here." "Of course, honey." She sat on my sofa with that seriousness that children sometimes have when they are processing something that they don't understand completely. "Grandma, is it true that you donated all your money because we were mean to you?" The question broke my heart and mended it at the same time. "Not all of it, Laura, and not because you were mean. It's because I wanted to teach your parents something important." "What thing?" "That people are valuable for who they are, not for what they have." Laura looked at me with those big, intelligent eyes she had inherited from her mother. "And am I valuable, Grandma, even if I don't have any money?" "You are worth more than all the gold in the world, my love, and I hope you never forget that." I hugged her, and for the first time in years, I felt that I was hugging a real granddaughter, not a little stranger who had been programmed to be polite to me, but who had never had the chance to really know me. That night, while eating an omelet that I had prepared for myself without rushing, I reflected on everything that had passed. I had lost a fortune, but I had gained something much more valuable, my own dignity. I had learned that sometimes to teach love, you first have to teach its limits. And I had discovered that the greatest freedom of all is knowing that you can live without the people who don't value you, even when those people are your own family. My phone rang. It was Matthew. "Mom, what are you doing?" "Having a quiet dinner at home." "And you?" "Thinking about you." "Do you need anything?" "Yes," he told me. And for the first time in years, his voice sounded completely sincere. "I need to know if tomorrow I can come over to see you, just to spend time with you, with no hidden agendas." I smiled, looking out the window at the lights of New York flickering like earthly stars. "Of course, honey. You are always welcome." And this time, when I hung up the phone, I knew it was true. Have you ever experienced anything similar? Do you know anyone who was valued only for what they could give and not for who they were? Tell me about it in the comments. If this story touched your heart, give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Maybe these words will reach someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to reclaim your own dignity, no matter how old you are.